everyone. Welcome to Block 1, Unit 1 of BEGC 104. And we are going to look into Chaucer, his life and works today. Uh, as I had mentioned in the introductory video that was made for this series of lectures, uh, initially in this lecture, initially as a part of this course, we are going to learn more about the initial stalwarts, the initial big names of British literature. And British literature, the way we know it today, or at least the modern English, Chaucer is the first name that would come to mind who describes the coming of age or the evolution of modern English as it is today. Chaucer can be considered or is usually named as the father of modern English or the father of British literature, also, you might. Right. So we are going to look more into Chaucer's life and the kind of his works in this lecture. And in the next lecture, we are going to move into uh, a work written by Chaucer, a part of his Canterbury Tales, that is the prologue of the Wife of Bath's tale. Right. So without any further ado, let's move into the lecture. First, I would like to give you an overview of the whole thing, what we are going to do in this lecture. Now, as we are going to learn about Chaucer, we are not just going to learn about his works directly. First of all, we are going to look into who Chaucer was, or not exactly who Chaucer was, but what did he have to do in his life. So we are first going to look into Chaucer's life's realities, right? So that is the first pointer or the first slide, main slide that we are going to look into. That is Chaucer's life and the rich backdrop of life's realities, right? Because whenever we are looking at any person who is in the history, who is in the past, we need to remember that we first need to be acclimatized or need to understand the realities of the person before judging what the other person was writing or saying. Because it is important for us to understand that if you take it in the example or in the context of India, let's say, so anything that is said in India today, and if you try to understand it in terms of something, let's say a time in the past, let's say uh, in the 1960s or 70s in India, you could not have imagined, let's say, a market as big as this. But after the markets have opened up in 1991, you see India is very different, right? So the realities of then and the realities of today, the realities of, let's say, our grandfathers, our fathers, is very different from the realities of today. And similarly, to know about a writer, to know about what someone was writing, we need to be aware of their reality. And that is why it is important to know more about Chaucer and his lifetime, what was happening then. Then after that, we are going to move into the major works that Chaucer has written. Uh, we are going to just see when he wrote those works and trying to form a thread somewhere and see what it could mean. Then we'll place Chaucer in the broad literary tradition of Europe. Now, this is very interesting because you see, when we are looking at Chaucer here, we are looking at Chaucer from the perspective of British literature, right? But Chaucer was very much inspired from other literatures outside of Britain at the time. You can take the example of Italian literature. There was Boccaccio who was writing. There were other contemporaries in Britain itself. So, what was the role these people played in Chaucer's life, and how can we place Chaucer in, let's say, context or in correspondence to Boccaccio, to Gower, right? That we are going to see in this subtopic. Finally, then after that, we are going to move into Chaucer's humanism and his secular outlook. Now, I have told you a little bit about humanism and the secular outlook in the previous lecture, right? How we were moving from a religion centric world to a more human centric world, and which was bringing the secular approaches probably. And we are going to talk mainly how Chaucer is different from the previous people who wrote, essentially, and how his characters and his themes are very different in that sense, in a sense that they appeal to the humanist and the secular traditions, right? After that, we are going to, as the topic has been named, intertwining of society and literature, which is a big debate throughout. We are going to see how life and literature corresponded each other in the era, right? We are going to see how much of the literature can be used to understand the life or understand the society of the time, and a similar thing with literature. So, vice versa of society and literature. Characteristics of Chaucer's art and vision. So, we are going to probably generalize a little bit, see a few broader themes in Chaucer's art and the kind of vision that Chaucer had. So, you might think that some of these topics and subtopics are overlapping each other, and obviously they are overlapping each other, and I will be talking about these are just differentiated for a betterment of you. But as I'll be talking about it, you will see that most points seem to overlap around each other, right? Finally, after all of this, we are going to move into a view of the wife of Bath's prologue. That is, Wife of Path's prologue is what we are going to do next in our course. So before that, I'm just going to give you an overview or a little bit an introduction into the Wife of Path's prologue. Finally, we are also going to discuss a few questions, right? So let's move into it. Let's go into the introduction of the thing. Yes. As I start talking about Geoffrey Chaucer, first of all, I need to tell you that Geoffrey Chaucer was born around 1340s, right? And we are going to look into his life in the next slide. Before this, I would like to tell you a few things about Chaucer, where his poetic sense is unprecedented, as I've written here. So, what is the meaning of unprecedented? Unprecedented means something that has not happened before, something which does not have a precedent, so to say, right? So, before this, before in the Middle Ages, so to say, religion dominated the society. There was folklore, there was myth, but the main dominating factor in the society was religion. And thus, when we see Chaucer writing at an age where with the help of the Canterbury Tales, where he creates so many characters, he tends to give an overview of a poetic sense that is very secular, that is very humanistic, and something that had not been done before, right? He was inspired by the multi-layered society. As we will understand when we read the Canterbury Tales, when we read a part of it at least, we'll try to understand, we'll get to know how there were people from different strata, when different people from the different strata behaved in a different way, and the society in itself were in different fragments. There were different kinds of people who were, as we see in the case of Wife of Bath, who mentions about the different kinds of rich uh, husband that she has had. She mentions about how her husbands understood different women to be. So, through one character, Chaucer has been able to show us different characters, and he has created such. 25, 30 characters out there in Canterbury Tales itself who have helped us to know the multi-layered, multifaceted British society of the 14th century. Right? He also drew from rich English folklore and myth. So, as I've said, that Chaucer's poetic sense is unprecedented. Now, because there was nothing before that could actually help him in trying to develop a humanist or a secular approach to literature, Chaucer seemed to be covering a huge vacuum in British literature in his time. So he used to draw a lot from the rich English folklore and myth. This folklore and myth could come from Greece, could come from Rome. He has written Troilus and Cresside. That is a story of the past, right? It is a story of, it is a mythological story to be understood, like it can be understood as a part of English folklore at the time. So, but it comes from there, right? And similarly, Chaucer seems to be taking a lot from the folklore and myth because he did not really have much precedent to draw from. Let's move into the next slide. Chaucer's life and the rich backdrop of life's realities. This is our next topic. Now, here I will be talking about Chaucer's beginning. Chaucer was born in between 1340 and 1345. The real date and the year is not known, but it was in the reign of Edward III. Right, so Edward III was the king at that point, and Chaucer's family was actually close to the king. Uh, his mother's side was closer to the king than his father's side, uh, and he was taken into service of the king as his valet. Now, who is a valet? A valet is someone who is in close quarters with the king, who is in close assistance of the king, and also takes care of the king's household. Right. So Chaucer got the position as the king's valet early on in his life, which actually meant that Chaucer would have had great proximity to the king and would have known the king in close quarters, right? This also led to Chaucer going in diplomatic service later on, where in the 1370s, Chaucer went to Italy, to France, and these experiences we see play a major role in his writing, or must have played a major role in his writing, because there is a great sense of understanding of different people and different kinds of themes, different cultures, which could have come from the expanding of horizons when he would have ventured out to countries, to his neighboring countries, that is. Right. Chaucer also worked in the customs office in London later on, which is also something that is worth mentioning as his life as a person of the court. Right. He was working in the court of Edward III. Talking about the age of chivalry now. What is chivalry? Chivalry is the bravado, the bravery, the ostentatious understanding of someone when he or she understands them to be morally higher than other people. If you look at the attitude of a king, where he or she, where he, I'm sorry, understands himself to be higher than everyone else, understands himself to be brave, ostentatious, and believes he should take care of his people, of women, and that uh, is a chivalrous attitude, so to say. Chaucer was born in the age of chivalry. The age of Edward III was understood to be the age of chivalry, where uh, the knights and the officials of the court were living in that bravado, that honor, where they looked down upon the other people, and the margin and the gap was probably uh, there, which we see in Chaucer's writing also. But what comes along with it is also the fact that in this time, there was a lot of poetry recitation, a lot of storytelling as a part of the court for pleasure, right? And it is through this through these pleasure activities that Chaucer seemed to have polished his art form, his storytelling, his method of literature, right? So again, although Chaucer tends to mock this chivalry in his writing, he must have got a lot out of it as well. So this is a bit about Chaucer's life. Let's move into the next PPT and get to know more about his writings, his major works. So we come into Chaucer's main literary works. Now, let me give you a disclaimer before I begin this. These are mainly his English works. Chaucer has also written in other languages. He has written in Latin, in Italian, and in French also, majorly. Right, but you have to understand that Latin was the language of the court at the time, the high language, so to say, and English was a language of the commons, a language of the locals. So, in his acceptance of English as his language to write, there itself he seems to demonstrate a secularity. Now, the first work that we see here is Roman of the Rose from Roman de la Rose, which is a French work. Roman de la Rose is a French poem which talks about the religious dogma and the breaking of religious dogma, essentially. It mocks, it satirizes the religious dogma. And a similar sort of thing is done by Romaunt of the Rose, which is a translation, but I would like to call it an adaptation of Romaunt of the Rose, where Chaucer, uh, in a similar way, tries to mock the religious air of the time. Along with it, he also tries to put it into the English idiom. That is why he just does not translate it from French to English, but he brings in the culture of England to translate Romance of the Rose. Right. If you try to understand this, I would give you the example of Macbeth and Makbul. Right. Macbeth is an English play written by Shakespeare, and Makbul is a Hindi film made by I'm not remembering the director right now, but it is a Hindi film, a Bollywood film, right? And it has been brought into the culture of India. It has been brought into the culture of Bollywood from Shakespeare's culture. So that is the kind of adaptation we are talking about when we are talking about French Roman de la Rose coming to Romance of the Rose written by Chaucer, right? Then we move into the three works that came in close by the Parliament of Fowls, Troilus and Cresside, and the Legend of Good Women. Right? These are works in Chaucer's later half, but middle later half, so to say. Here in Troilus and Cresside, he seems to be taken from Homer's story. So we see how he has taken from mythology, he has taken from folklore at the time. And finally, we go into Chaucer's masterpiece, which he could not complete. He died before completing it. That is the Canterbury Tales, right? Where he talks about different characters going in a pilgrimage, going for a pilgrimage, right? So these are Chaucer's main literary works. Uh, let's move into the next slide and talk more about Chaucer and how do we see him, where do we place him in British or in European literary landscape. Right. So placing Chaucer in the broad literary tradition of Europe. As I've put in a quote here by Chris Harman, given in A People's History of the World, he says, writers such as Boccaccio, Chaucer, and above all, Dante made a name for themselves by producing secular literature written in their local idiom, and in the process gave it the prestige to begin its transition into a national language. Now, why do I talk about this while talking about placing Chaucer in the broad literary tradition of Europe? If you look at this, there are three major writers of this time that we are talking about. We are talking about Boccaccio, we are talking about Chaucer, and we are talking about Dante. Now, all of the three writers took local language as their language. And as it mentions, they began its transition into a national language. Chaucer was doing that with English, Dante was doing that with Italian, Boccaccio was also doing that with Italian. So they were writing it in the local dialect, and they were writing it in the local language, and they were the major reason where the language started to grow on the national space, right? Along with that, we are also noticing here how all the three writers produced secular literature, right? You see, Dante was, uh, he died much before Chaucer. So Dante would have probably began this tradition. Boccaccio was a contemporary of Chaucer. Uh, Boccaccio was old when Chaucer was in his prime, but Boccaccio can still be understood to be the contemporary of Chaucer, and Dante was living slightly before Chaucer, right? So we can see these three major writers in the literary tradition of Europe, and we see how Chaucer seems to be the third in this landscape, wherein he seems to be taken from the secular ethos of Boccaccio and Dante and their writings, right? So this is how we see how Chaucer is taking from the tradition of Europe. Let's move into the next slide. So now we are going to talk about Chaucer's humanism and secular outlook. Now we have been talking about this for quite some time, about Chaucer's humanism and Chaucer's secular outlook. So, first, let's try to understand what is the meaning of secular, right? What is the meaning of the word secular? Secular means when every strata of the society, when every level, so to say, of the society gets a say in something and is looked at equally, right? So, take for example the Indian society. And if we are able to say that, let's say, every religion, every caste, every other distinction in India gets an equal say in something, in be it the election of a leader, or be it the passing of a bill, or anything, in that, if everyone gets an equal say and everyone's voice is heard unanimously, that would mean a secular outlook where everyone is looked at equally, right? Humanism, as I've already told you, is the removal of the seated God in a pedestal and the humans being seated there. So you can look at it in a way where previously it was the searching for a soul, the searching for something otherworldly, the searching of a god that was primary to the human value. Later on, it became the need of the body, the need of the humans that found major or that found the prime seat in the humans' requirements, right? So, in a way, it can be looked at as the distinction between the body and the soul, also, where in the past there was a need to look at the soul, to find the God. But as humanism came into the outlook, there was a movement towards the finding of the body, what the body needs, the requirements of the body in the world, right? So now the first point is how the foundation of modernity and secular belief is laid in English poetry by Chaucer. Now, if you look at the works of Chaucer, you will see that all the characters, be it a woman, be it a male, be it a priest, be it a knight, or be it anyone else, a friar, everyone gets an equal say and everyone is kind of mocked unanimously. Everyone is mocked. You see that everyone uh, contributes to the narrative, and none of the characters are being looked at as completely bad, so to say. Everyone is being made fun of, but no one is disregarded or uh, so shown as a vice, right? So that is a secularity coming into British literature, which was not there before this. As in the religious texts or in poetry and drama that involved or that was mainly based on religion, human beings were only used as symbols to show good and bad. So there was no actual let's say you can term it as realism or a reality of human being shown, but it was much rather as symbol of good and bad, right? So the coming of the real human in English poetry is where you can say that Chaucer's humanism and secular methods are coming to the fore, and there is a sense of modernity coming to English poetry, right? Another major reason that you can say which caused such a change in the poetry could be the increasing gap between the different classes of England. I'm going to talk more about it. I'm going to talk more about how the Black Death, how the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 had a massive impact on the society of England, which in turn probably brought about the change in Chaucer's writing and in his understanding of the world. Obviously, what also played a major role in that was the writings of Dante and Boccaccio, as I've said earlier. And as they were the flag bearers, the real flag bearers of humanism and modern thought in the whole of Europe. And we see how Chaucer is the youngest of the three, and Chaucer has probably learned a lot from Dante and also from Boccaccio, who were also writing in their local languages, which Chaucer also ends up doing. He ends up writing in English, right? So, yes, this is the main forming of Chaucer's humanism and his secular outlook, right? Let's move on into the PPT, right? So, the intertwining of society and literature. Now, in the previous slide, I have hinted a little bit towards it, where I have mentioned how the peasants' revolt of 1381 and the Black Death and also the labor shortages have had severe impacts on the society and in turn in literature. Right now, there is a text by John Gower, which is called Vox Clementis, also written in this time period. Uh, if you look at this text, there is a reference made to the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. But this reference is from the perspective of a courtier. John Gower, again, was a man of the court. Uh, he had his privileges and he writes from that perspective, and he is also writing or hinting towards the peasant revolt from the perspective of a person in high authority and for the people who are again in high authority. So he's not writing actually for the common people, but he's writing for the courtiers and just for the courtiers to enjoy, let's say, for their pleasure. Right. Also, the significance of the Black Death. If you look at the importance of religion at this time period, there was uh, in the Black Death, many of the priests, many of the friars also died, and there was a shortage. And there was also a significant shortage of intellectual development in the clergy, in the priests. Uh, so slowly, due to these tumultuous times in the society, the gap between the rich and the poor increased, wherein uh, the privileges of the rich were more starkly visible from the dark times that the labor class had to face, right? So from that point, the difference or the gap between the rich and the poor seemed to have increased. We see this in the present revolt also, and thus uh, a shortcoming of the society in itself, where in the rich classes failed to inculcate in them or bring equality in society by bringing the peasants, bringing the working class together, seemed to be lacking. We see this in the quote that I've mentioned here, which is a quote probably from the present revolt of 1381, uh, which says, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then a gentleman?" Right. So it is trying to bring about the Genesis, that is the beginning of the world when Adam and Eve were created. But at that time, the question that they're trying to ask is, who was a gentleman at that time? Was there a gentleman? Was there a king? Was there a knight? Was there a priest at the time when Adam and Eve were created? Or were these gentlemen, these chivalrous people, these chivalrous knights, the king, the priests, invented only by man or by God? This is what they are trying to ask. And this is, in a way, what we are seeing in the literature written by Chaucer, where he's not going directly as to abuse or, let's say, hold the rich people, hold the gentlemen, so as to say, accountable, but he's certainly asking questions. He's asking questions of the clergy. He's asking questions of rich old people. He's asking questions of the friars, and so on and so forth. He's also asking questions of knights. Right. So Chaucer's commentary and its ramifications in the later eras, if we have to talk about it, what is the meaning of ramification? Ramification means what are the consequences in some sort of way of Chaucer's commentary. So when Chaucer was writing this commentary for the people of the contemporary eras who are reading it, for them, it might be pleasurable and it might also be thought provoking. Some might not have imagined that a priest could be mocked, or a person, a knight, could be mocked. But Chaucer doing that can ignite a fire of, let's say, protest, or at least a question in the minds of the contemporary readers. And for the later eras, for our times, it helps us in understanding the society of the 14th century, where in today, sitting in the 21st century, we are talking about the 14th century through Chaucer's literature, and we are understanding how literature developed, and we are also understanding how the society probably was facing its own challenges, its own problems, and probably was also going through a major change in its structure. Right. Okay. So this is majorly how the society and literature were intertwined in this time. Right. So let's move on to the next slide. Here we have the characteristics of Chaucer's art and vision. I have two slides with the same topic where I have taken two quotes. Both of them are by John Dryden. And I believe these two quotes are a complete elaboration of what Chaucer's art and vision encapsulated or entailed. Right. So I'm going to explain these quotes to you, and I believe you will also know the quotes. You'll also understand the quotes, and you'll get to know more about Chaucer through these quotes. Right. So it says Chaucer must have been a man of most wonderful, comprehensive nature, because, as it has been truly observed of him, he has taken into the compass of his Canterbury Tales the various manners and humors of the whole English nation in his age. Again, talking about how Chaucer, in his writing, in creating so many characters, he has probably encapsulated the whole English nation. The feeling of the whole English nation in his age. Right. He has encapsulated how a woman felt. He has encapsulated how uh, probably a woman who has been married 5 times. So, let's say an outgoing woman felt through the words of the outgoing woman, the wife of Bath. We also get to know about other men of the society. We get to know about the knight. We get to know about the priests. We get to know about the friars of the society. So we get to know about a lot of people in the society, and thus the Canterbury Tales kind of becomes the microcosm of the English nation at the time. Right? He says all his pilgrims are severally distinguished from each other. So it is not as if he's talking about two priests, if he's talking about a monk, if he's talking about friar, all of them are similar. No, they have uh, distinguished characteristics, they have distinguished understanding, and Chaucer has been able to maintain these distinctions in his characters, wherein all their characters, and they are not even same in their inclinations, in their physiognomies and persons. So inclinations here tends to mean that in their beliefs they're not even similar in their beliefs, although it is written by one person, but their beliefs are all being entangled, and they're questioning other beliefs, and they're not even same in their physiognomies. So Dryden, what he's trying to say here, he's trying to talk about Chaucer's brilliance in the creation of characters who touch every segment of the English nation in this time. Characters who are not just an extension of Chaucer's imagination, but uh, extended in a way that they end up becoming individuals who have their own inclinations, their own physiognomies, and their own persons. Right, let's move on to the next quote, which will again tell us something about Chaucer's art. Here, Dryden says the matter and manner of the characters' tales and of their telling are so suited to their different educations, humors, and callings that each of them would be improper in any other mouth. Right. So again, what he's trying to say here is how the characters are so well distinguished that, let's say, if the monk says what the priest or the friar has said, it would sound completely wrong. Or if, let's say, the knight says what the friar has said, it would sound completely wrong. That each of them would be improper in any other mouth. Even the grave and serious characters are distinguished by their several sorts of their gravity. Their discourses are such as belong to their age, their calling and their breeding such as are becoming of them, and them only. So essentially, what Dryden is trying to say here is again how well fleshed out the characters of Chaucer are. He's trying to emphasize on the fact that these characters that have just been surrounded by the book or been surrounded by the tale, they have been able to become independent individuals. They have been able to become fleshed out characters with their own identity, so to say. Right. He says that some of his persons are vicious, some virtuous, some are unlearned or lewd. So, vicious means some people are able to harm, some are virtuous. You can take the example of the monk. Some are unlearned. people who lack education, or as they call them, lewd, and some are learned, people who are intelligent or who have a lot of knowledge. So even the rivalry of the low characters is different. The reeve, the miller, and the cook are several men, and distinguished from each other as much as the mincing lady prioress and the broad-speaking gap-toothed wife of Bath. So Dryden again is trying to emphasize on Chaucer's characterization, where he says even two women, Lady Prioress and wife of Bath, are two completely different women. It is not as if he's creating a man or if he's creating a priest. Two priests are of the similar kind. If there are two priests in the Canterbury Tales, if there is a reeve, there is a miller and the cook, they are not just people from the lower strata of the society. They are different individuals who have their own beliefs, their own inclinations, and their own physiognomies. Right? Physiognomies means physical characteristics. So, again, if you read the Canterbury Tales, you will notice that all the characters are very different looking. The monk is fat. Wife of Bath has a gap tooth. In similar ways, every other character is different in physiognomies, is different in physical characteristics from each other. And this is how Chaucer is trying to be secular. He's trying to encapsulate every strata of the society. He's trying to encapsulate as many types of characters from the society as many he finds in the society. So this is how Chaucer is the Canterbury Tales or Chaucer's work, for that matter, becomes secular in nature. Right. Let's move forward. So, as we are coming to the end of this first lecture, we are going to slowly move into the next lecture that is going to happen. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Wife of Bath's prologue that we are going to read in the coming lecture, right? So I'm just going to give you a brief into it, and we'll move into and look at a few questions mainly. So the first point, as a connector between two tales, yes, as this is a prologue, before this we have had one tale, and this is the Wife of Bath's prologue. So we are getting to know who the character is, who Wife of Bath is as a person. We are getting to know her physical description. We are getting to know that she has had five husbands. We are getting to know all of these things. And slowly we are moving into her story. So this is a brief prologue which gives us which gives us the details of this Wife of Bath, who she is. And this is how Chaucer brings Wife of Bath to life as a character, because we see that she drifts around points. She does not really chalk out everything that she's going to say. She is very open minded in that sort of way, which also begs us to think about whether a woman would have been that free in the medieval times. Uh, re- I've mentioned here that it relieves the reader of the writer and placing them in the scene. So, in the scene, what happens is that the reader stops worrying about the teller of the story, that is Chaucer, or the innkeeper, who is the head of that position at that time. And the reader only thinks about Wife of Bath. And it places the reader in a zone where he or she imagines a marketplace and all of these characters around him, and he is trying to uh, go and chalk the different conversations that are happening around him. It also gives us a clear image of the 14th century, which obviously the Canterbury Tales, as I already told you, works as the microcosm of the 14th century society, and it gives us a lot more insight into whatever is happening in the society. So, in that sense, it becomes a major historical text, also, you can see in terms of that, where it gives us a clear image of the 14th century society. Right. So, let's sum this all up and let's look at a few questions. Now, I have marked this PPT as to ponder upon. So here, through these questions, as we see these questions, we are going to understand what we learned in the lecture today. Briefly discuss Chaucer's vision of life and society. I'm sure you will be able to uh, write an answer to this. If you have to talk about Chaucer's vision of life, you can see how he tries to inculcate unity in society and equality in society. You can see how Chaucer is able to see the flamboyance or the superficiality, where the rich or the kings, the priests, uh, tend to overlook their position and their privileges. And he's able to look at the uh, lower strata of the society and bring them to a equal level ground in the form of the Canterbury Tales. And this is how you'll approach this question. And you can look at the lecture again and find many more points to write about. In what way is Chaucer a great humanist? If you have to talk about Chaucer the humanist, you can think of different ways in which he has, in his way, tried to remove religion from the pedestal and bring the humans to the pedestal, to bring human needs to the pedestal, to bring the necessities of life to the pedestal. And that is how he's becoming a great humanist. What are the main features of Chaucer's modernity? You can say that the features of Chaucer's modernity is his way of looking at things, his perspective, his way of giving a voice to every character, giving a distinct, independent voice to every character, be it the wife of Bath, be it the prioress, be it the friar, be it the monk, or be it the king, be it the knight. So everyone gets a voice and everyone gets a say, everyone gets a story. And this is one of the main features of Chaucer's modernity, where he's able to bring secular values, he's able to bring everyone in the level ground. Write a critical note on Chaucer's modernity. It is again a similar question, and I'm sure you'll be able to answer it by yourself. Try to answer these questions and see you in the next class. Thank you so much.